Harold Brennan never imagined that a simple trip through the Utah desert at 78 years old would change his life forever. When he spotted the abandoned 1957 Chevrolet Bel Air on the shoulder of Interstate 15, half hidden among dry brush, he thought he had found just another old car forgotten by time. But inside the glove compartment, a chilling discovery awaited him. A mysterious key attached to a keychain with the initials EM and a yellowed paper with a handwritten address, 1247 Maple Street, Cedar City, Utah, accompanied by a note that would make his blood run cold. In case something happens to me, the house holds our most precious secrets. What Harold didn't know was that this key would open not just a physical lock, but the doors to a 65-year-old mystery that had destroyed an entire family. Elena Martinez, 73, had her life shattered at age 8 when her mother Emma disappeared without a trace in 1958, along with that same turquoise blue Bel Air that Harold had found. For more than 6 decades, Elena wondered what had happened to her mother, until the day a kind stranger appeared at her door holding the key that would reveal secrets buried in her own house's attic. Hidden between the floorboards, a metal box held evidence of obsessive stalking, blackmail, and corruption that had cost a brave mother her life. The final pages of Emma Martinez's diary revealed the name of her pursuer, a powerful lawyer she had decided to confront in a desperate attempt to protect her daughter. But Emma knew she was walking into danger, and her last written words were a declaration of eternal love. If something happens to me, Elena must know that I love her more than life. What Elena and Harold discovered in the depths of that dusty attic was not just the truth about a disappearance that had haunted an entire town for decades, but concrete evidence of crimes that had been covered up by powerful connections and suspicious deaths. A secret recording, compromising photographs, and documents proving client money embezzlement painted the picture of a woman who had died not by accident, but for trying to do the right thing. But the most shocking discovery was yet to come, hidden in a safety deposit box that Emma had rented in Salt Lake City, containing a final letter that would reveal not only the ultimate details of her fate, but an inheritance that would change Elena's life forever. Harold had casually stumbled upon the thread of a story that connected generations, exposing the courage of a 1950s woman who defied a powerful man to protect her daughter. Now, with evidence in hand and a mystery finally unraveled, Elena and Harold face one last haunting question. What really happened on that fateful September night in 1958, when Emma Martinez drove her Bel Air for the last time? And why was her car found abandoned in the middle of nowhere, as if she had simply evaporated from the world, leaving only whispers of a story that someone very powerful wanted to remain buried forever? One key, one address, 65 years of silence broken. Sometimes the past has its own way of finding those who need to hear its truths. Harold Brennan was 78 years old when he decided to take his last solo trip on Interstate 15, crossing Utah toward Arizona. The old retiree drove his faded pickup with the determination of someone who knew this might be his final adventure. The midday sun beat mercilessly on the asphalt when he spotted something unusual on the shoulder, near mile marker 184. There, half hidden behind a cluster of dry shrubs, was a 1957 Chevrolet Bel Air, turquoise, blue as if it had been abandoned for decades. The car looked ghostly in that arid landscape, its chrome still shining timidly under the intense light. Harold braked abruptly, his heart racing with a mixture of curiosity and nostalgia. Getting out of his pickup, Harold walked slowly toward the abandoned vehicle, his footsteps echoing in the absolute silence of the desert. The Bel Air was in surprisingly good condition for something that had clearly been left there for a long time. The turquoise blue paint had faded slightly, but there was no visible rust, and the tires, though dusty, seemed to be in reasonable condition. The windows were open, allowing the fine desert sand to accumulate on the cracked white leather seats. Harold ran his hand over the body, feeling the familiar texture of the worked metal from the 50s. It was like touching a piece of his own youth, a time when cars were built to last, and each model had its own personality. Curiously, the car doors were unlocked, as if the owner had simply stepped out for a walk and never returned. Harold carefully opened the driver's door, which groaned in protest after years of inactivity. The interior revealed fascinating details. An original AM radio, a lighter built into the dashboard, and hanging from the rearview mirror, a pair of red plush dice faded by the sun. There was also a 1958 Utah road map, folded and refolded so many times it was falling apart at the creases. Harold sat in the driver's seat, closed his eyes for a moment, and could almost hear echoes of old conversations, rock and roll songs playing softly on the radio. The smell of old leather and desert dust created an almost sacred atmosphere. It was when Harold decided to check the glove compartment that his discovery took an unexpected turn. Inside, he found a small spare key attached to a metal keychain with the initials EM engraved on it. Along with the key was a yellowed paper with an address written by hand in faded blue ink, 1247 Maple Street, Cedar City, Utah. The paper was accompanied by a brief note that read, "In case something happens to me, the house holds our most precious secrets." The handwriting was feminine and delicate, and Harold felt a chill run down his spine. There was something mysterious and melancholic about those words, as if they carried the weight of an untold story. Harold carefully tucked the paper and key into his shirt pocket, deciding that Cedar City would be his next destination. Before leaving, Harold made one last inspection of the Bel Air, looking for more clues about its original owner. In the back seat, half buried under accumulated sand, he found women's sunglasses with tortoiseshell frames and a September 1958 Life magazine with Marilyn Monroe on the cover. There was also a small hand mirror with a silver handle, clearly a woman's personal item. Harold began to form a mental image, a young woman from the 50s, probably driving alone on these deserted roads, carrying secrets she deemed important enough to leave written instructions about. The feeling of being connected to a story from the past grew with each discovery. Harold returned to his pickup, but couldn't stop looking in the rearview mirror at the solitary Bel Air, as if he were leaving behind an important piece of a puzzle. The 2-hour journey to Cedar City passed quickly, with Harold lost in thoughts about what he might find at the mysterious address. Cedar City was a small and charming town, nestled in southern Utah, with its tree-lined streets and well-preserved Victorian-style houses. Harold drove slowly down Maple Street, watching the house numbers until he found 1247. To his surprise, the house was in excellent condition, a 2-story colonial-style Undie construction, painted white with navy blue details, surrounded by a well-maintained garden with rose bushes in full bloom. A low white wooden fence surrounded the property, and a small sign on the gate read, "Martinez Family Property." Harold parked on the street and watched the house for a few minutes, trying to gather courage to knock on the door. The key in his pocket seemed to burn against his chest. A gray-haired lady was watering flowers on the porch when she noticed Harold standing outside. She was approximately 60 years old, wore a blue floral dress and a white apron, and there was something familiar about her delicate features. When their eyes met, she abruptly stopped what she was doing, as if she had seen a ghost. Harold waved timidly and walked to the gate, the key and paper firmly secure in his trembling hand. "Excuse me for bothering you, ma'am," Harold said, "but I found something that might belong to your family." The woman descended the porch steps slowly, her eyes fixed on Harold's face as if trying to decipher a riddle. "I'm Elena Martinez," she said with a soft but cautious voice. "How can I help you?" Harold explained his discovery of the abandoned Bel Air and showed the key and paper with the address. Elena brought her hand to her chest, clearly moved, and her legs seemed to weaken for a moment. "That was my mother's car," she murmured, tears beginning to form in her eyes. "Emma Martinez. She disappeared in 1958, when I was only 8 years old. The police never managed to find out what happened to her or the car." Elena invited Harold in, her hands trembling slightly as she opened the gate. The house inside was like a museum from the 50s, with period furniture perfectly preserved and black and white photographs adorning the walls. Harold could clearly see the resemblance between Elena and the young woman portrayed in several photos, presumably her mother Emma. "For 65 years I've wondered what happened to her," Elena said, her voice breaking with emotion. Elena guided Harold to a cozy living room, where she served tea and shared her family's story. Emma Martinez had been an independent and determined woman, unusual by 1950s standards. She worked as a secretary in a law office and raised Elena alone after her husband's premature death in the Korean War. "Mom always talked about having important secrets kept at home," Elena explained. "But I never knew what she meant by that. After she disappeared, I turned the whole house upside down looking for clues but never found anything." Harold showed the key again, and Elena examined it carefully. "I've never seen this key before," she admitted, "but maybe it opens something I never thought to look for." The hope in her voice was palpable, mixed with decades of longing and unanswered questions. Harold felt the weight of responsibility to help solve this family mystery. Together, Harold and Elena began examining every room in the house, looking for locks that might correspond to the mysterious key. They checked drawers, cabinets, old chests, and even a small safe that Elena knew was empty. The search led them to the attic, a dusty space full of old trunks and family mementos. It was there that Elena remembered something. Mom always said the most important things stayed where no one would think to look. Harold followed his instinct and began examining the floorboards, looking for one that might be loose. In the darkest corner of the attic, underneath a pile of old magazines, he found a board that gave slightly under pressure. Carefully removing it, they revealed a secret compartment built in the space between the beams. Elena held her breath as Harold inserted the key into a small metal box hidden inside. The click of the lock opening echoed in the attic's silence like a whisper from the past finally being heard. The box contained treasures that Elena had never imagined existed. There was a collection of love letters written by her father during the war, some so intimate that Elena blushed as she read them. They also found stock certificates from various 1950s companies, carefully organized and which, Elena would discover later, were worth a small fortune after decades of growth and splits. But the most touching item was a brown leather diary with the initials EM engraved on the cover. The yellowed pages revealed Emma Martinez's most intimate thoughts, including her fears about raising Elena alone and her concerns about a man who had begun stalking her at work. Harold and Elena read in silence, each page revealing more about the brave woman Emma had been. The diary's final entries were particularly disturbing, describing a co-worker who was becoming increasingly insistent and threatening in his unrequited romantic advances. The diary's final entry, dated September 15, 1958, just 2 days before Emma's disappearance, contained a shocking revelation. Emma wrote about her decision to confront her stalker, a lawyer named Richard Thornfield, and threatened to expose his inappropriate behavior to the authorities. She mentioned having evidence that Thornfield was embezzling money from clients and planned to use this information to force him to leave her alone. "If something happens to me," Emma wrote, "Elena must know that I love her more than life, and that everything I did was to protect our future." Elena cried as she read these words, finally understanding the sacrifice her mother had made. Harold, deeply moved, embraced Elena as she processed decades of finally answered questions. The room was wrapped in sacred silence, as if time itself was paying homage to Emma Martinez's courage. In the box's documents, they also found a life insurance policy that Elena never knew existed, plus a sealed letter addressed to her to be opened only when you are old enough to understand. Elena, now 73, certainly qualified. The letter revealed that Emma had discovered concrete evidence of Thornfield's corruption and had hidden it in a bank vault in Salt Lake City. "My dear Elena," the letter began, "if you are reading this, it means the worst has happened, but it also means you finally have the answers you deserve." Emma explained that she had left detailed instructions with the bank so Elena could access the vault when she turned 21. But Elena had never received this information because the bank's letters were sent to the old address. Harold watched Elena process this revelation, seeing decades of pain and questioning slowly transform into a mixture of pride and sadness. Elena decided they needed to go immediately to Salt Lake City to access the vault her mother had left. Harold, without hesitation, offered to accompany her, feeling deeply connected to this story he had discovered by chance. The 3-hour journey was filled with conversations about Emma, with Elena sharing childhood memories that now made more sense. Mom always checked the locks twice before going to sleep, Elena remembered, and sometimes I would find her looking out the kitchen window for long periods, as if she were waiting for someone to appear. Harold shared his own reflections on how fate had led him to that abandoned Bel Air, as if Emma were orchestrating this meeting even after so much time. At the bank, the oldest manager vaguely remembered unusual instructions left decades ago about a vault that should remain untouched until certain conditions were met. The vault's contents exceeded all expectations. Besides the meticulously organized evidence about Richard Thornfield's corruption, there were photographs, documents, and even recordings on a small 1950s recorder that Emma had secretly used to document compromising conversations. Most importantly, there was one last letter to Elena, this one even more personal and touching. Emma explained that she had decided to confront Thornfield in a desperate attempt to end his persecution, but feared the worst. "If I don't come home," Emma wrote, "know that every decision I made was out of love for you. You are my greatest achievement, my brightest light, and even though I may not be physically present to see you grow, my love for you will live forever." Elena held the letter against her chest, finally having the emotional closure she had sought her entire life. Harold, deeply touched by witnessing this intimate moment, felt immense gratitude for being the instrument that brought this family separated by time back to union. With Emma's evidence in hand, Elena decided to seek information about what had happened to Richard Thornfield. Harold accompanied her to the municipal library, where they spent hours researching old newspaper files. They discovered that Thornfield had died in 1962, just 4 years after Emma's disappearance, under suspicious circumstances. His car had been found in a ravine, and police had classified the incident as possible suicide. The newspapers of the time briefly mentioned an investigation into financial irregularities at his office, but the case had been filed away after his death. Elena felt a complex mixture of emotions: relief to know that the man who had probably harmed her mother no longer existed, but also sadness for never having the opportunity to confront him with the truth. Harold watched Elena process this information, admiring her strength and dignity in the face of such painful revelations. "At least now I know Mom was trying to protect us," Elena said softly, "and that she was brave until the end." The discovery of the evidence also led Elena to contact local authorities to formally reopen her mother's disappearance case. Although 65 years had passed, the retired detective who had worked on the original case was still alive and eager to review the new evidence. Harold accompanied Elena to the meeting with the detective, now 89, who clearly remembered the Emma Martinez case. "I always knew there was more to this story," the detective admitted, "but we could never prove anything against Thornfield. He had powerful connections and always managed to escape deeper questioning." The evidence Emma had left painted a clear picture of blackmail, stalking, and probable murder. But with the perpetrator dead for decades, the case would be officially classified as solved, even though justice could never be completely served. For Elena, however, having answers was more important than seeking revenge. In the following days, Harold and Elena developed a deep and meaningful friendship, united by the extraordinary experience they had shared. Elena insisted that Harold stay as a guest in her house while they organized legal matters related to the discoveries. They spent hours talking about their lives, their families, and the meaning of human connections that transcend time. Harold, who had begun that trip feeling isolated and at the end of his life's journey, now felt revitalized and purposeful. Elena, in turn, had finally found peace after decades of questioning, but had also gained a true friend in her golden years. "You were sent to me," Elena said one night. "Mom always said angels appear when we least expect them." Harold smiled, thinking about how a casual discovery had changed not only Elena's life, but his own as well. Elena decided to use part of the unexpectedly substantial inheritance left by her mother to establish a fund in memory of Emma Martinez, intended to help women victims of stalking and harassment. Harold offered to help administer the fund, finding a new purpose for his retirement years. Together, they also organized a memorial ceremony for Emma at the local cemetery, where they installed a beautiful headstone with the inscription, "Emma Martinez, Courageous mother, woman of principles, forever in our hearts. Elena's friends from the community attended, as well as some older residents who remembered Emma from the 50s. Harold was moved to realize how his casual discovery had not only solved a personal mystery, but had also allowed an entire community to honor the memory of a brave woman who had been forgotten for too long. The ceremony brought closure not only for Elena, but for the entire town that had wondered about Emma Martinez's fate. Months later, Harold still visited Elena regularly, and they had become chosen family to each other. He had canceled his plans to move to Arizona, and instead found a small apartment in Cedar City to stay close to his new friend. They frequently visited the site where the Bel Air had been found, which Elena had managed to locate and visit with Harold's help. The car had been towed and restored, and now occupied a place of honor in Elena's garage, a mobile memorial to the mother she had lost so young. "Sometimes I sit in the driver's seat," Elena confessed to Harold, "and feel like she's there with me, finally at peace." Harold frequently reflected on how a simple trip had transformed into the most significant adventure of his life. He had left home looking for one last glimpse of freedom, but had found something much more valuable: purpose, friendship, and proof that it's never too late to make a difference in someone's life. The turquoise blue Bel Air, once abandoned and forgotten, had become the bridge between past and present, uniting two lonely souls and giving both a reason to move forward with renewed hope.